welcome along to another of our Two Beer Ideas online lunchtime sessions, and definitely looking forward to this particular session. It's been really interesting talking with David behind the scenes about some of the concepts and talking points that we're looking to cover today, and very much looking forward to hearing from him. In terms of that, we are obviously always looking for other speakers. So if you're watching along thinking this would be cool, I'd quite like to get involved with this type of stuff, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're always looking for ideas, even if you don't feel that you want to present, but you have an idea for the community. Again, drop us a message. We always absolutely love to hear from people that are in the community. In terms of today's session, as you can see, your brand is not your logo, it's everything you do. Really looking forward to, as mentioned, and we're joined by David O'Hearn. So I'll ask David, if possible, David, if you could turn on your camera and your microphone now, it would be great to join you on stage. How are you doing today, David?
Yep, all good. Yeah, and enjoying the sun as we spoke about briefly.
Oh, man, I feel a little bit scruffy, if I'm honest. Normally I join these things with a collar on, and yeah, today I've just gone completely rogue. I've been out and about in a t-shirt, so yeah, very much enjoying that myself. In terms of David, David's got 25 years experience in the creative industries. He's the founder of Dawn, founded back in 2014. So as I say, very much looking forward to hearing from him. In terms of that, as I say, it sounds like a simple concept, but I suspect there's a lot to this, David, and I'm very much looking forward to hear from you on it. So if possible, I'll maybe get you to share your screen. And we'll go from there. And just as you're doing that, and what I'll call out is obviously we do have the chat and Q&A feature within Zoom. If you have a question, please stick it in the Q&A. It just makes it a bit easier to manage afterwards. But again, feel free to say hello in the chat as well. In terms of that, David, I can see your screen. I'll maybe get you to go full screen if possible.
I have, so maybe that's lagging. Full screen here.
Bear with. Yeah, it's not quite done it on this side, so I'd maybe.
I'll just escape and do it one more time.
Yeah, that may be a good idea. Stop the share and start again. This is the beauty of technology, isn't it? We did a little test behind the scenes and it all worked perfectly.
Has that gone to full screen?
No, not yet. Yeah, we can still see the tab at the top with the name of the presentation and stuff like that.
Let me just quickly stop sharing and let's,
no worries.
let's redo it.
I think when the slides look that good, we need to see them in full.
I'm going to go for full screen rather than a particularly selected file.
Ah, man.
Yeah.
There we go. Looking perfect.
Magic. There we go.
Looking perfect. So looking all good. I'll disappear now, David, and I'll jump back in at the end for the Q&A. Hope you have a great session, and I'll see you soon.
Cheers. Well, hello to everyone. As I've just been introduced. I'm actually heading into my 28th year, I think, at the moment, as it happens. I have ran agencies for 20 of those 28, so only been employed for 8 of them, mainly focusing on what a brand actually is. So the title of this event is perfect. This is the actual sentence we use at the start of any presentation with a new client or a prospect. Because we all know we need to get over the point that the logo is pretty insignificant in comparison to what an actual brand is. And so the whole point of the presentation today is to talk through what a brand actually is, all the component parts to what make a brand, and then we'll maybe touch on the logo at the very end, because that's about as important as it gets within developing a proper brand for your organization. So I'll run into the slides, talk you through them all, and then hopefully there'll be a couple of questions towards the end as well, which will be great. So the first thing we do to try and simplify it down for everybody is to say you could make it as easy as to say there's just 2 sides to it. It's a little more complex than that, but this normally paints a very clear picture as to what a brand actually is and the areas that you need to focus on. In most of the meetings we have with, like I say, clients, prospects, just generally people I'm talking to, I think the word brand is misunderstood. And I think that's probably the biggest problem that we've got that we need to face. I think if I asked everyone in the street what a brand was, most people would probably say a logo, maybe colours, and they focus on a couple of things, don't fully understand that the brand is everything that an organisation does from top to bottom. So we look at it in two ways. On the left-hand side, we've got what we call the brand core, and that's our language, but it's essentially the strategy behind the brand and the business. And then on the right-hand side, you've got the brand identity, which is the bits that people see. And there's a difference between the two. You can obviously see things and get a feeling from that, but a brand, by its very nature, should give off an overall feeling in all parts of the brand. So some of that's visual and in the identity that you see day to day, but another part of that is the interaction you actually have with that brand and that business. And that could be the people that work at the organization. It could be the way you can communicate and engage with them. It could be the quality of the product, the service, etc. But the whole thing essentially has to marry up. And it's these two parts that, when done well, is when we actually get a strong brand. And my view is there's only a few strong brands in the world, unfortunately. And if more companies went through the process properly, understood what a brand was, I think we'd have better performing brands in the UK than we currently do at the moment. So under the bonnet of these two areas, if we move on a slide, this is just a summary illustration to try and show you what creates the feeling and what creates the visual side of things, the things that people see. So on the left-hand side, and a lot of the work we will do with people is based around trying to establish what the hell do you even stand for as an organization anyway, because a lot of companies set up because someone leaves another company and thinks maybe they could do it better, and then they set up and pretty much set up the same company that they left before, apart from the fact they've got a different logo and name. And apart from that, they don't do massively anything different, which I think is a crying shame. So we try and find out, or we work with them to say, why are you even doing what you do? You know, what is the purpose behind your organization? And the purpose should be greater than it would have been 20 years ago. You'd say to make profit and pay shareholders and so forth. That would be pretty much as far as anyone would take it. The modern world demands something greater than that, clearly. We can all find out what any brand does on the planet, whether that's good or bad. We can find out where they produce their product. We can experience their service. If we don't like any of what we experience, we can go onto social media and tell as many people as possibly can. 20 years ago, you'd just phone them and moan at them, or maybe tell your friend down the pub. That's about as far as it could go. So companies need to have a real reason as to why they exist. And people get this a little confused because a lot of people think, well, the purpose must be something to do with being sustainable or carbon neutral or planting trees and things like that. And my take on that is, well, in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, however long it takes, that should be something every company probably does anyway. So it doesn't really make us get out of bed in the morning and want to achieve something. So we try and get under the skin and push people to have a bit more blue sky thinking as to why you exist in the first place. And then you can drive everything forward through that purpose. And you should never be able to achieve it. It should be something that you exist for, to fight against. And then you've got other things like brand values. So how do you want your organization to behave? How do you want the people within the organization to behave? Because the values themselves can shape all decision making. They can make how you go about recruiting people. It could be how you do team reviews based around the values and performance of the value. You could have team member of the month based on them performing the values on a more regular basis. But having values that live and breathe throughout an organization means that if people can see leaders and directors using values to make actual business decisions, it means then people realize that they're actually taking them seriously. And it allows anyone in any given role to be able to come up with an innovation, whether that's a small innovation or a big innovation. They can nudge the company a little bit closer to one of those values, or make one of those values even stronger. Other things that the organization is more responsible than we are through this process is trying to work out what levels of service are they actually going to offer someone, because that can vary obviously from organization to organization. But what are our standards? And those standards should be based on some of your values and your purpose as to why you exist in the first place. you can also decide what type of benefits do you get from our product or our service, which is different to a nearer competitor based on values and purpose again, or unique selling points or points of difference. Most companies I deal with really struggle with this because, as I said before, they set up a company which is basically just the same as the one that they left before. So there's no real difference. But if you start a brand and when you're working on your brand and you have nothing that's completely different, one, that's a bit of a shame. You need to address it. But if you can't think how to address it, you should then look at your values again and say, if I look at those values really closely and come up with some innovations, will those innovations then make us different to our nearest competitors? And do we believe those innovations are a compelling enough story for our customers and clients to want to engage with us? So everything that's the other side of a visual identity is what shapes a business, all its business decisions. And when businesses decide that they don't want to follow their own values or their own purpose because something's turned their head, there might be a chance to make some money, so they think they can actually break some of their own values. That's when things start to fall apart, both internally, teams see it, they don't believe in the values anymore, so then they misbehave, and then the whole thing starts to fall out of line. Equally, if you don't live and breathe your values through your actual identity and your communication and your campaign, then actually your audience that engaged with you in the first place start to think that you're not being true to yourself anymore either. And so that might give them an opportunity to think, oh, actually, I might try a different brand. I might go somewhere else because this one's starting to disappoint me in some way. So the feeling bit and all the bits that go behind the brand are, for me, the most important part. And then we get onto the visual side, which again, I think most people believe it's a name and a logo. For me, that's like close to being the least important part. It's the other bits that any good brand, I think I could show you, and you would recognize it visually by type, graphics, color, imagery, or illustration, depending on the style of brand that you've gone for, the tone of voice, and obviously in the modern world, movement and sound should be determined early on as to how fast or slow do we move as an organization, both from levels of service and response rate on email or how quick you answer a phone call. That should also play out in how you animate social posts or a how-to video. It should give a sense of what kind of organization are we? Are we fast or slow or deliberate or more slick? And sound portfolios can obviously work as well. So every company on the planet now has the ability to do that. It's not for brands that are just on TV. We can create social posts, we can create YouTube content. We all have the ability to be able to make the brand move and make a sound. But all those component parts make a strong visual identity. We can only choose typefaces and graphics and color if you know what your values and your purpose are, because the identity is supposed to try and display those things, and it'll shape the tone of voice and the words that you actually use. So on a very basic level, you're creating a human. We all have values. We all have a particular style that we might want to wear clothes and stuff like that. If you just judged everybody by their face, which is essentially their logo, you wouldn't know much about anyone, would you? So you need to go deeper than that. A logo is essentially just recognizing the fact that that's the company that you thought it was. And everything else about it is trying to express what this brand is about. And it should only appeal to a certain type of audience. Apple, I've used for 28 years. Half the world hates it. Apple are fine with that. They actually don't want half the world even using it because they're deemed not creative or cool enough to be using an Apple product anyway. So you've got to actually stand for something, and it plays out in everything that you do. So if we get into like some of the component parts of it, there's a thing called brand architecture, which I personally find the people I engage with, not many people even know it exists. You can Google it and you can find examples of it. But the main reason companies get into a problem with their brand is because they don't understand the brand architectures that exist on the planet. And if you Google it, you can find sometimes people say 4 or 5. I'd stick with 4 different architectures that exist. And at any point in time, you will reside in one of them. As and when your brand grows and you make other decisions, whether that's acquiring another brand or adding a new product or service, at that point in time, you can change architecture. If you don't know that you've done it, that's when things become a complete mess and you can't wriggle your way out of it. And then guess what happens? You think, oh, we need to rebrand. So then you come to us and then we have to sort out the mess again and go again. So if people understood a brand more at the start, then we'd get better brands that know the direction of travel, and we'd also know when we're making a decision what impact that actually then has on the brand as a whole. Other things that seem obvious, we use the word audience for when we're trying to speak to people about who is your brand actually trying to appeal to. So you can obviously have customers or clients, and you can go down a path of saying, oh, we might create personas for different types of customers and clients. But a brand doesn't just have customers or clients. It obviously has employer brand, like bringing people into the team that maybe have similar values, different skill sets, but similar values. So it makes the brand even stronger by getting the right people within the broader team. They're an audience as well, because I can decide whether I even want to go for an interview with a brand based on whether I think the website's good enough or not, whether they've even produced any content in the last 3 months. If they feel like they're a dated company, I might not want to work there anyway. So they won't even get a chance to have an interview with you. So that is another audience. Even partners that you might work with are an audience. And especially if you're going into a space where, as a brand, you want to become something like a B Corp organization, where you have actual set parameters of how you perform as an organization, that will affect your suppliers and who you actually can and cannot work with. And you have to make those tough decisions, because if you're going to stand by the brand that you've established, you can't just change from one decision to the next. You have to kind of stick with your guns. So sometimes we'll run workshops and people get up to 6, 7, 8 audiences for their brand. It's not just about a client and customer. We need to think of that. We have one brand, let's say, if you own one brand, but it has different audiences. And at times it needs to talk to them and communicate to them slightly differently, but not wildly differently, because at the end of the day, you're trying to still control what your brand is ultimately about. You've obviously got other things like positioning, and then also against your competitors. And again, this is often something that people just don't see in their own business or their own brand, but understand it when they then leave their own business and go shopping for something, whether it's a holiday or a supermarket. And the supermarket world is probably a good example of positioning anyway, in the fact that a very basic level, Aldi and Waitrose are 2 very different organizations. They both offer very similar things, and you can go there and shop for whatever that you want, but the experience are very different. You'd expect a lower price basket at Aldi than you would at Waitrose. The logo of Aldi suggests that it's probably a cheaper offer. The Waitrose logo suggests that it's a higher end offer. You know, Waitrose buildings are architecturally designed. Aldi's are normally a single story brick building. Aisles are wider in Waitrose than they are in Aldi. All these little things obviously account to positioning overall and what your expectation is. And a lot of the time, people don't even consider where they want to be positioned. So sometimes you produce a visual identity that for most people might look cheap or mid-market, but actually your product or service that you're trying to push might be of a really high standard and have a decent price point to it. But you're just going to confuse someone because they think they're going to get a bargain, then they find out it's expensive. Or the other way around, which happens less, is that you might accidentally look a bit expensive, but your product's actually cheap. So no one even makes an inquiry because they haven't got the money to spend high. So positioning, I mean, that's a very basic summary of positioning, but it gives you an idea of going, you need to consider where you actually want to be in the world that you're in and in your own sector specifically. Other things that people struggle with, as I said before, really, is finding points of difference. So a unique selling point, you could argue, could be tough. But I still believe if you use your values and your purpose right, you can actually achieve it. But points of difference might be that we can create 5 things, let's say, that make us different to our nearest competitors. Some of your competitors might have 2 or 3 of the same things. But when you're in a pitch situation, or you're trying to push content to customers or on a landing page on a website, if you believe those points of difference are going to be compelling to that customer, it might just be one of those 5 points of difference that you've got is the one that grabs their attention the most, and then that makes you different to your competitor. So again, for me, all these things should come from the core of your brand. The words behind your brand should shape all of this decision making. Then a structure we use, I mentioned purpose before, as to why the hell do you even exist? What is the point of your organization? And if we deleted you tomorrow, would anyone actually care? That's how serious we would take a purpose. And purposes, once written, really should last a lifetime. They might get tweaked, but they should be there for the long term. A vision and a mission, a vision will see giving a sense of where you're going as an organization, so your collective team can get behind it. But a vision can change, clearly. You can achieve a vision, you can rewrite it. And the mission is essentially, how are we going about trying to achieve that vision? So we can have a vision, but we're going to do it in a certain way. We're not going to achieve the vision by doing things completely opposite to say what we stand for. When we achieve our vision, we've got to achieve a vision in a way that is right for the organization, again, based on the values and the purpose that we've put together and things that we're going to hold ourselves accountable to. That gets into values. I often use a human as an example, because I think people overcomplicate what a brand is, even though it has a lot of component parts to it. No one ever sits down and thinks, I'll get a pad and a pen and write down my own personal values that I stand for. But on any given day, if you're happy or massively frustrated or annoyed, it's probably because something's happened that's gone against your own value system. That value system comes from your parents or your upbringing or your friends, but you ultimately will stand for something. And for me, that's how you would go through the process of creating values for your own brand. Is, what are the things that annoy me, I hate the most in my own industry or in life? Because if it's the opposite to that, then you're going to stand on your soapbox and you're going to fight for it. But people just don't generally think like that. But we've all got our own values, and that's, for me, what a brand is trying to achieve, is saying, look, these are the things that we stand for. And even as a founder, I'm going to hold myself accountable to those values, so that everyone in the organization knows that these need to be taken seriously. And those values will appeal to a certain type of audience. And hopefully they won't appeal to some people as well. And you go, great, then at least we know what we stand for. And we also know the people that respect what we stand for. This can then shape your overall personality. There's loads of different ways you can create a personality and lots of different theories, but you could easily just say, well, I know we're a friendly, happy-go-lucky type of company, or do we need to be more serious and more formal? Just at a top level of personality, what direction of travel are we actually taking as an organization? And again, it would be shaped by the words behind the brand. Your values and your purpose will shape what type of personality you want your brand to be. Then you get into other things like naming. So, we argued whether naming should be at the start, but most people will name a company, then start thinking about what it should become. In an ideal world, if you're going to set up a brand from scratch, you should do all the groundwork first of positioning and purpose and values and everything else. And then the name that comes from that would be more suited to what you actually want to stand for. Whereas most people will just go to, I'm going to name my company as descriptive as I can so that everyone knows what we do. And for me, in a modern world, you go, at what point does someone not know what you do? The only place that would really happen is if I randomly sponsored a local cricket club and just put my logo on the side of it. Then clearly no one would know what I'd do. But in that instance, you'd probably put your web address as a minimum, or maybe you'd have a sign-off strap line or something like that. It gives a sense of what you do. But the name itself being descriptive doesn't have to be the case. All the best brands on the planet will pretty much show you that and prove that point, that the name is more of a feeling that the identity is wrapped around and the brand is wrapped around, rather than saying, I'm going to tell you exactly what I do, and probably add the word solutions or services at the end, which in all fairness means absolutely nothing to anybody. So naming for me should be considered as part of the overall journey of building a brand, rather than start with a name, register with a company's house, and then try and adapt to get a brand to fit the name. And then storytelling over the top of it, what are the things that we can bring to the table that are going to be a little bit more memorable? Everyone can remember a really nice short story, but when it gets into business, we seem to lose that. We go straight for features and benefits and we forget the fact that people will buy on feeling and sometimes can't explain why they've actually bought something. It's more just something felt right. It felt like the right type of thing to do. They've struggled to explain why they're making some of those decisions. And storytelling through, whether it's written content or whether it's video content, you can create whatever you want in the modern world and tell a more compelling story than I think a lot of brands and a lot of businesses actually achieve. And then a core message. So again, too many people over communicate and give too much information, too many bullet points on a slide or in a social post to the point where no one's even reading it and they certainly won't remember it. Whereas some of the best brands on the planet will stand for pretty much one thing, and that's the one thing you'll remember them for. So Coca-Cola tries to push happiness is kind of its key word, its core message. And it tries to push that more than it does anything else, which is why it's got associations with the holiday season and Santa Claus and Christmas stuff like that, because that's generally a positive feeling for people. But if you look at all the photography and the wording and the language that they have, they're trying to give a sense of happiness, which you might think sounds ridiculous when it's a fizzy drink in a bottle that anyone can make. But there is a big difference between having a sentiment and a feeling that changes your chemicals in your brain to think, oh, happiness is associated with Coke. And there's been tests done on this where Coke's brand wins out on Pepsi just because of your thought process that goes on in your brain, which is why Pepsi's always suffered to be kind of second in command, even though supposedly it tastes better in a taste test. So it's trying to focus in on what is the one thing we're trying to say to the world. And then we get into the identity side. So all of what I've just been through really is under the bonnet, the feeling, how you actually create a really robust, solid brand. And then you get the identity bit, which is what most people see every day. And this is where people think this is a brand, whereas I'd argue that's probably branding or visual identity or brand identity. It's the clothes that the company wears, but those clothes can be a lie. You could be looking and feeling a certain way, but when you actually engage with the company, it's terrible. So they've not done the first bit that I've just gone through. And you need both sides of it to match to be able to make a robust brand. So clearly the tone of voice, again, I'll use a really simple example to get the point across, but an organization could say, welcome to blah, 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 or they could say, hey, we're blah, blah, blah. They're saying the same thing. They're just saying it very, very differently. So I would expect both organizations to behave differently when I engage with them. And I might think the welcome to is a little bit dated possibly. So maybe that's not for me and I want to go with the one that says, hey there, it sounds a bit more positive. Again, it all about context, depends what type of organization it is, where you want to position yourself in a marketplace. But all of it should influence the way that the company actually communicates, both in the written word or spoken word. Then you've got things like type. Typography is hugely important, so often underrated. People are always wanting a freebie. Can I get a free font? Can Google give me a font? Yeah, well, Google can give anyone a free font and you can get free fonts anyway, but it's very likely that that's what a lot of other companies have probably done as well. So actually investing in a typeface, you can invest monetary wise. You can go as far as some companies do globally and just have a whole typeface made for your organization, which is probably cheaper than having a license for a font, for example. But type by its very nature can suggest things. It can suggest whether you're more corporate or you're more friendly or you're more fun. It can do a lot of things and also become a huge part of a brand. If you think of like Macmillan and the charity, their font is really, really distinctive, along with the color green and things like that. But the font plays a huge, huge part in their identity. And a font can really tell a story, not just in the written word, but the way that it's actually expressing itself in the way that the typeface is created. Then you've got colors. Now, if you're starting out with a new brand, obviously one approach would be to look at the market that you're about to compete in and see if there's any gaps. It doesn't mean that if the gap's available, you have to go into that one color, but it gives you an opportunity to consider whether it could be appropriate for you. Ideally, you obviously then look at your values again and your purpose, and you consider the whole thing and think, what are we trying to say as an organization through color? And can we pick anything that is different to our nearest competitors? Because that obviously would be useful. And colour by itself generally accounts for about 90% recognition of any successful brand. So if I said to everyone, go into any supermarket later today and go and find Rice Krispies, without realizing, your brain will be saying pale blue to you all the way through that process until you find a pale blue box. So it should come as no surprise that Tesco's version of the same product is in pale blue because it's trying to grab your attention. So colour is hugely important in both the decision making as to what your brand should have as a colour palette, but also for recall and recognition for your audience to actually engage with and remember you. So then you've got colour and type working in harmony, which strengthens the visual identity. You then got graphical devices. So some brands are more graphic heavy, some brands have very few graphics, but graphics can be anything from a box to a circle, or it could be something a little bit more expressive. So like the EE brand, for example, has lots of dots to kind of suggest like connectivity and data, and they build up typefaces from those dots. So that's quite graphical. But then someone like Apple, you might think, oh, it's quite minimal in their graphics, but everything has a curved corner. So all the boxes on their website or in the Apple TV have curved corners. The phone has a curved corner. The laptop has a curved corner. A subtle curvature on their boxes is part of the visual identity of Apple. And that's a graphical device. So even just a curved corner compared to a square corner on a box becomes a graphic as long as you're using it consistently. It's just a part of your brand. Then it becomes another little bit that people can start to recognize. Then obviously in the modern world, there's a bigger demand for icons than ever before because of all the digital assets that we engage with, so whether it's a website or an app. An iconography kind of portfolio needs to be determined. There's no point in just Googling for icons and picking any old icons. You can either have them professionally drawn, or you can pick a suite that matches the font a little bit and feels a bit more like the value you're trying to display. And again, all icons vary wildly from highly simple professional to quite quirky illustrations, and they give off very different feelings. So again, it's another component part of visual identity and an area that really needs to be considered. And then you've got things like illustration. For one, will your brand even have illustration, or is it going to be more image-led, or will it have a combination of the two? But if it's going to have illustration, again, like everything I'm going through here, you need to decide what type of illustration is it going to have. Because I could have someone produce illustration that was quite childlike, quite fun, but that might belong in a nursery. Whereas I could get someone to do illustration that I might see in The Guardian, and obviously that might make us feel more like a professional organization. So anything you pick for your brand has an impact on what people perceive. An illustration, typeface, color, all of these decision making needs to come from somewhere, and it comes from the words behind the brand. That's how we make all of our decisions when we're developing identities for organizations. Same with imagery. You could have images, you can go and get stock imagery. I was in a meeting yesterday with like IT tech companies, and they're just guilty of grabbing like the worst stock imagery of, a cloud that's been digitally created. Doesn't really mean anything to anybody, and it's quite cold and off-putting. But imagery itself, again, stylistically can change wildly. So you need to think, what type of imagery style do we want? If we're a people person's organization, and we say we are, and we should probably go through the process of photographing most of the people that join the company, if they're going to be visual somewhere on our website, or if we want them to be on LinkedIn, and whilst they work for our organization, they have to use one of the images that we put forward as part of their induction program. So then again, images then, if I showed you some images from the bigger brand, you'd probably know which brand it was just from a photo alone. As I mentioned before, sound, not many of us engage with that at the moment, but Skype did it years and years ago, to the point where you'd know when people were using Skype in an office. McDonald's, I'm loving it jingle at the end. If you just hear the jingle and you can't even see the TV in your house, you know who it is. We all love music, and if you hear a song, it takes you back to a time when that song was out. So the power of sound is huge. We all know it. It's just that most companies on the planet don't really use it. We certainly don't think it through to say, what kind of sound should we have as an organization? If we're going to have music over something, what kind of music should it be? Should we have our own music written rather than just use some stock music over the top of an animation? And equally, gestures and exchanges, like the Monzo app, if anyone's got that, has a sound portfolio. When you transfer money from one to the other, it makes little coin noises and exchanges because that's the character of that particular brand. Then you've got movement that can match with that. As I said before, you can move at a completely different pace, but I would expect JCB to have rules around how that brand moves, which might be more mechanical, more methodical, whereas Google should have a completely different way of moving because it's deemed to be more tech-driven and more slick and maybe more efficient. And so movement, again, will make a suggestion to someone, but it also means you can brief someone on an animation and a video because you've actually got some rules about how fast or slow you move as a brand, rather than just commissioning a video off the cuff and hoping for the best. Then you've got other things like slogans. Should you have a slogan? Should you not have a slogan? That's a debate in itself, really. Sometimes we'll produce them as part of an identity project. Sometimes we don't. For me, they've got to still come from somewhere. And ideally, they still come from like a purpose or values. So like Nike's Just Do It comes from the overall ethos of what Nike actually stands for. So it supports the whole narrative of Nike and what it's trying to achieve, whereas other slogans sometimes don't really mean all that much. So I kind of think if you're going to do it, make it back up the overall identity. And then slogans themselves, maybe with a jingle over the top of it, can become a memorable asset. And again, we're all capable now of putting a social post together or putting a YouTube video together, which means we can do those two things at the end of any of our video content if we choose to do so. And then finally, we get to the logo, which hopefully by now you realize is a really, really, really tiny part of a brand. And a brand is everything that you do, not a logo. But whenever you speak to anyone, the conversation is all around logo, whether they like a logo, they don't like a logo, or our logo is not good enough, or they don't like the logo we've produced for them. All comes around conversation around the logo. And I'll often say to people, look, do we think Apple's logo is amazing? Most people go, yeah, it's brilliant. And you go, but at the end of the day, it is just an icon of an apple. It's brilliant because of the association with the organization, that it's heavily design-led as a company, that it's generally pushed the boundaries of what can be done, even though everyone's starting to catch them up now. But the logo itself is just a statement piece to say, the association I have with that is hopefully a high quality product that's well designed and well thought through and simple in its approach. The logo doesn't make the brand, doesn't make the company. There's a lot of bad logos out there that technically I would say need to be redone and they need to work in the modern world. And so from a designer perspective, I can be quite critical about a lot of logos, but people get obsessed about them to a point where they think that is their brand. And I've just shown you, I don't know, probably 30 slides that would say that isn't the case. So that's the title of the presentation. Obviously, logo is important in the fact that it needs to be thought through and reflect something of the organization, but it's a tiny, tiny part of what an actual brand is. But the final thing, just coming back to audiences, a brand's got to do a lot of things. We obsess about the fact it's about the customer, and I get that, or client, because that's where the revenue would come in, people would buy your product. But you've got other areas. Like I said before, you've got partners that you might engage with. The leaders have got to take the brand seriously. Otherwise, no one else in the organization is going to care for what you stand for. The team then can adopt it, get behind it, innovate within the organization. You can talk to different departments. What does HR want from the brand? Well, they probably want to have a good employer brand. They probably want a good area on the website that attracts that type of talent. When you're putting out job posts, they actually want it to suggest what the organization is about. And what is the induction program like? What are the benefits you get if you join a particular company? All different departments have a reason for being, and their reason also needs to be, how do we push the brand as hard as we possibly can in any given situation? Obviously, then customers will feel that, new team members would feel it, and even suppliers and things like that, how they operate with you. You can choose whether you want to operate with someone or you don't, depending on whether you think they match your brand or not. And then last few bits just on a good brand. It's just been refreshed and new guidelines written. But this is them identifying two audiences. They obviously help people learn a new language. That's their one thing. But they've defined quite a few different audiences, and these are just two examples. But in the developed world, they're basically saying easily the most effective way to learn a language. That's all people are wanting to do. In the UK, I want to learn a second language. Maybe I could go to Europe, I could maybe work in Europe, or I could order a drink and some food when I go on holiday. In the developing world, Duolingo is your ticket to anywhere. So in the developing world, people might want to escape where they are. They might want to learn English to be able to come over to here to work here or in America. Completely different reasons to why they're learning a language. And Duolingo's done a really good job of establishing its brand, but then identifying its audience and then talking to them specifically about their greatest need. And that's how they are starting to manage their brand. There's a lot of admiration for the Duolingo brand at the moment, and how the app works and all the interactions. But it's managing your brand. There's no point in rebranding and having guidelines and then letting it just fall apart, because 5 years later, you'll be doing it all again. Managing your brand every day for 60, 70 years, as some of the best brands have on the planet, it's tough. It's hard to do, but you can do it better when you actually know what you stand for. If you don't stand for anything, everyone in your company will have an opinion, which means they can just change the goalposts, which means your brand is changing all the time and confusing people. So that's pretty much me wrapped up. If anyone's found it interesting, I know you're maybe some questions coming in, but we'll also offer up a 30-minute lunch and learn where people can dig into this content a little bit more if they want to, and interact with us. The guys are going to give you a link at some point in the journey, but that's me done for now. Hopefully I've proved the point that a brand is more than just a logo.
Well done, sir. That was fantastic. I absolutely loved that. And you definitely got your point across in a very succinct way. In terms of that offer for the 30-minute option to come and chat with you guys, I'd highly recommend it. Really appreciate you offering that out there to the community. I think I might need another 30 minutes to go through some of the questions that I have. But I will jump in and start asking a few questions myself. Anyone, as I say, watching along at home, feel free in the Q&A to ask any questions that you may have. I think the first question I had, and I really loved that you finished with the logo. I perhaps would have been one of these people going, yep, make me a logo. I like certain colors, shades, styles, whatever. Make me that logo. I need it. And again, with the naming of the company, and you kind of flipped it all around in its head and started thinking with a deeper purpose, what is it all about? I think first question I had actually was more around, you've obviously got lots of experience working with companies that have identified these brands, values, they've got strong values. Have you seen in these companies where you're working with them, the companies that have the strongest values, does it mean that they're more aligned, that they have better commercial impact? So doing all of this makes lots of sense in terms of building the brand, but does it also translate into being a better business, do you think?
When you say stronger values, that would be an interpretation of whether someone read them and thought that was stronger than another set. But let's assume that you've gone through the process of creating values and we all believe in them in an organization, and you've got a really strong purpose. I would say that on the planet, let's just throw a random percentage out, I reckon there's only about 5% of businesses on the planet actually have a brand, and 95% don't. Mm-hmm. People go, no, there's way more than that. I go, you think of all the businesses on the planet, the UK's got 95% small business, small to medium-sized business. Yeah. But the only real successful companies are the ones that manage the brand properly, have really strong values and a really strong purpose. And everyone else is not driving that forward in the same way. But you have to deliver on it daily, and the leaders have to be held accountable to them. If you write them down, then leaders start to think, oh, I don't really need to follow that. It all starts to tumble down. So yeah, for me, the best brands are doing that. Some have been around for longer, but if you don't start off on the right foot, you're not going to get to where you want to get to. On so many levels, you know.
Yeah, makes lots and lots of sense. I think carrying on that conversation then about setting, you know, your purpose. You know, if you're SpaceX, it's easy. You know, we're going to Mars. If you're selling stationery, it's perhaps a little bit, you know, harder. I've had the same thing myself personally. So I run my business, Data Idols. We're a technology recruitment business. Someone asked me out the blue, I was in a meeting with someone, what's your mission? And I was like, oh, you know, and once you start to pull it down, the whole way home on the train, I was thinking, you know, we're a good business, like we're a great business, but what is our mission? You know, stuff like that. So have you got any advice for people that are perhaps looking at this going, okay, how do I find these values, this purpose, this mission?
So you mentioned values there. So let's start with values. I did kind of slightly touch on it, but we run an exercise where we say, we put the word hate on the screen, and a lot of people react to that and kind of go, oh my God, that's a bit harsh, Dave. And I go, no, I want to go through an exercise where you list all the things you hate, either in your current company, somewhere you worked previously, or your industry, or day-to-day life, things that really, really get you back up. And we go for them first. Then we say, right, okay, what is the feeling we're trying to avoid? Because we hate all that, so we're not having it. And then the other side of that becomes your value, and your value becomes a strong, really strong value then, rather than values that are here when people go, well, we're professional and innovative, and they go, right, all companies should be professional, so that's not a value. And most companies aren't innovative, so we're not giving you that one either. I actually want proper values that are human. Like, why are we even doing what we do, and how are we going to go about doing it? And you can make them really strong and really push yourself if it comes from a point where you go, I cannot stand that stuff over here. So that's how we do values. Purpose is a tricky one, but I think if you really think it through, you can get there, and you can make a real big difference to your organization. One quick topical one could have just turned around against it by the sounds of it, but Unilever, years ago, they wrote their purpose was to make sustainability commonplace. And when I say it, most people go, oh my God, yeah, right, as if. And I go, okay, fine, I get it. But if they don't write it down, they can't turn the big tank around, can they? So you've got to write it. And then for me, if I was in Unilever, and I'm assuming they were doing this until they've just decided not to, you can push your product team and say, where do we get the plastics from at the moment for the bottles? Right, that's got to change. How are the liquids that go in? How are we producing those? Where do we buy our stationery from? Well, that's not good enough. Do we have a cycle to work scheme? Are we collecting water off the roofs of our offices? And you can push it through every single part of an organization. And now actually your purpose is very different to what it was before, about we make some detergents for clothes or something. It's like, well, that's not a purpose, is it? So that's an example that people would argue against, but it's a point of saying, if you really want it to work, you can write something that is abstract to what you actually do, but it becomes a way stronger reason to why people get out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, makes sense. Scale like that, it melts my brain as well. You know, if you're an organization like that, they must have hundreds of thousands of people. And, you know, when you're saying it's a tanker and changing direction, it's hard enough when you're in a small organization, founder led. I feel like you've got a chance, but in these big companies, it's big stuff. So awesome. There's a couple of questions that were coming in the Q&A, so I'll jump to those 1 second. I'm going to ask one more myself. As I say, if you're watching along, jump in. Definitely, we want to hear from you. The one thing, and I know majority of people are going to do is you name your company and then you work it all out afterwards. And again, it's like coming to the logo last. It makes sense to have the name later in that process. Have you ever seen a situation where you're like, this name just doesn't fit? You know, did you ever get to that point where you're just like, you have to rename it, you have to go back to the drawing board if this is what you want? like rename it, or do you work around it? How does that type of
I
thing
mean,
work?
there's been a lot of instances where we've either said, look, you've pretty much got to rename, because they've come to the table saying, right, we're expanding and we're going to go into these areas. And you go, but you've called yourself this.
Yeah.
Getting the new areas is now tougher because you've been so exact in the first place. Or if the first part of the name is okay, we'll get rid of all the baggage. So Solution Services Limited. It's like, what is that? I mean, everyone should offer a solution and some level of service. So those two words are just non-entity. They're pointless being there. So get rid of them. So even just getting rid of some baggage, you can then create a stronger brand name just by using the first part of a crap company name. Then you've got instances where that's happened and they've got through it. Carphone warehouses are a great example. Like, they don't sell car phones from a warehouse. None of us really even break that down anymore. We just go and get a phone and a new network provider from there. But they did used to sell car phones at one point. So they got through it and ended up with a name that is very descriptive. The only reason I think that it's actually been okay is because no one really knows what a car phone is anymore. So it's kind of like a dated name that's got through it. But in an ideal world, for me, the more successful ones are the ones that are more evocative, like Virgin, Apple, Nike. You can go anywhere with those names.
Yeah, but mate, for sure. And coming up with good names, Jesus, it's hard. It's hard.
Now,
it's hard, yeah. And then you've got to get all the socials and websites that line up with the name and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, definitely tough. 100% no. When you were mentioning, oh, we've had some crap names, you definitely thought of a few, and then you thought, I'm not gonna say that out loud.
No, I don't know. I've probably struggled. We've definitely had a lot, but I can't think of one.
No, I won't put you on the spot. I definitely don't want to put you on the spot. So there's a couple of questions that have come in the Q&A. First question from Jeffrey Payne. Lovely to see you with us, Jeff. He's asking, why do we seem to instinctively have this bias in favor of the logo when it comes to branding? Is there an answer to that? Is it just human nature, or are we just so used to seeing the logo and associating logo with a brand, or what's your gut feel?
I think it's because we see a lot of them, don't we? As in they're relatively front facing. But I take it back to the very start. I think two people maybe chatting in the kitchen, a glass of wine, go, I hate my job, let's set up our own thing. What should we name it? Blah, 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 blah. Right, rubbish name, well done. Or we can get it on Companies House, great. Open a bank account, right, done. What do we need next? We'll get someone to do a crap logo for us.
Yeah.
We'll get started. So the first three things you ever do is name, crap logo, and bank account. And then you start trading. So because it becomes the first thing, I think people think, oh, I'm protective over it. And they also want it to be ridiculously clever. And you go, no good logo on the planet is ridiculously clever. It just isn't. But then we laud them because they've been around for 50 years, though.
Yeah.
You know, they become recognizable and they mean something. Not that they're a good or bad logo.
Yeah. Makes sense. Exactly that. It's a tick box exercise, isn't it? I'm starting a business. I must have a logo.
Yeah.
And going back a few years, you'd add on, well, that logo needs to go on a business card, but we don't give those out anymore. Like, we don't have car phones in our car. The other question that's coming from Ben Tuckwell. Thank you for the question, Ben. How do you test or validate your design ideas with relevant audiences to see if they have the expected effect?
So it depends again on the client and the size of budget. So if it's a bigger scale one, which will help this conversation a little bit more, we would go through a process where you're actually saying to the people at the start, who are the audiences, which I went through, and then we'd go through the process of saying, okay, can we interview some of your customers? Can we interview some of your suppliers? Can we interview some of your team members? And get them to actually feed back into the brand core, so like purpose and values. Do they believe those things are represented in their organization in the first instance? And then when you get into the point where you're starting to develop the identity and shape and flesh that out, all your design decisions are based on those words. Yeah. So if we pick colors or fonts, we're saying the reason we picked them is because you said that being friendly and approachable in your organization is really, really important. So we'll display that back to them. And then you can test some of those visuals and some of those identities back with those audience to say, do you think that is now more reflective of the values that you believe the company stands for? Because a lot of the time it's just a mismatch. It's like we've got some values, but what we're saying externally doesn't match it at all. Or we've got some values, but no one ever uses them. So they're an irrelevance. I don't know if that helps the question, but it's kind of doing full cycle of who are we testing it against and with, and how important is someone's opinion? Because there's a mass audience out there that we can't ask the question to. Otherwise, you'd get into a forum where everyone on the planet has an opinion, and that's a dangerous space to go as well.
Yeah. Oh man, very, very, very hard. Amazing. A question's just popped in from TK. How many logo options should be a good number? And do you create complementing design elements, tone of voice, graphics, colors, brand core to go with these options? So I guess TK is saying, obviously, you've been through that process. You've started to build the picture of the values and all the other good stuff. At that point, what happens next? Does it depend on the client? Do you come back and recommend 3 options? Is it at that point, can you go back and just show one?
Well, one of our own values is being bold. So that means we'll say things as it is sometimes, and that might upset a few people, but it's like, well, you are asking our advice and paying us for a reason. So we will say whether what you've got is crap or not. Which then led us to say, well, actually, we're not going to come up with 3 concepts. In all honesty, people aren't paying us for 3 concepts unless they wanted three times the bill, which they won't. So we won't do that. And actually, going through the process we go through, you could ask 100 agencies to design something, and you'd probably get 100 different visuals. But what you shouldn't get in any of those answers is Aldi here and Waitrose shows there, because someone's not been briefed properly. So our view is, if we go through the exercise we go through, all of our decision making and is intelligent design. So we come back and we'll be very bold. We take it to the nth degree where we've completely done the whole thing: logos, colors, type, graphics, movement. We'll even do movement and sound in like the presentation. And somewhere in that mix, there will be a logo. Again, not the be all and end all. And we present the whole thing and go, there you go. And I would say, out of all the projects we do, we're probably 98% first time approval, and sometimes a little bit of tweaking and refinement. If you show 3 ideas, someone says, I like a bit of that, a bit of that, a bit of that, and then you get Frankenstein's monster, and you go, that's not the brand that we wanted to be.
I love it. Yeah, this is why you've engaged us. We've listened to you, we've taken all the information, and here you go. Yeah, absolutely love it. Amazing. I'm a little bit conscious of time. We've got about 1 minute to 2, and we're doing very well here. This has been a well-oiled machine. So I will start to draw things to a close. Just from that perspective, obviously, as you say, 30 slides. There's multiple takeaways there. I'm sure everything's going off, and it's caused people to think. If you were going to perhaps give one tip, or one starting point, or one piece of further reading, or one, what would you say at this point, just to kind of close the show? I've put you on the spot, haven't I?
I think unfortunately, you have to explore a lot of what I said. But first and foremost, sit down and actually challenge yourself. If you're setting up a new company, or you've got a company and it has a bit of an identity, it doesn't really have a brand, sit down and do the deep thinking. Like, what are we? Why are we even here? What are we trying to achieve? How can we do something different? What kind of value should we actually stand for? Just get a bit creative in that. There's enough on the internet to research Google, or you could download our brand toolkit if you wanted to. That's got everything that I've just gone through in it. You've got to do the hard work. You can't just turn up and expect things to happen. I talk about fitness. You've got to be a good runner. Guess what you got to do? Got to work, do quite a bit of running. So
it's a shame, isn't it? You've got to do the work.
Do the hard work, and then start to build off the back of it.
Amazing stuff. Amazing stuff. I absolutely loved it, David. Thank you so much for offering up your time. I say this pretty much at the end of every session as well. It's not just the hour that you've given up here. You've clearly spent a lot of time thinking about what you want to get across, what it's all about. So it's massively appreciated. It has been recorded, so yeah, we'll get it out onto socials. But it's been absolutely awesome today. So thank you very much, and thank you to everyone that's joined us. How did you find it? Have you enjoyed the session?
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. Thanks for having us on. I appreciate it.
Good fun. Well, thank you all very much, and yeah, look forward to seeing you all very soon. And yeah, goodbye for now. Have a good one.